There are love stories the world was never supposed to know, not because they were hidden, but because the ones who lived them became something else, something that could no longer speak in words, something that could only be heard. This is one of those stories, and the reason you are hearing it tonight is not an accident. Nothing about this moment is an accident. Before the first city was built, before the first river had a name, before the first human being opened their eyes and looked at the sky and wondered what was up there, there was light. Not the light of the sun, not the light of stars. A different kind of light, the kind of light that existed before light had a name. The kind of light that everything else was made from. The kind of light that, if you could stand in its presence, would not blind you. It would complete you. This light had a name that has been spoken in 1,000 languages, across 1,000 centuries. The morning star. And he was everything. Not metaphorically, not poetically, literally everything. The most magnificent being ever created. The first light ever given form. The one who stood closest to the source of all things and reflected that source back into existence. He was beautiful in a way that made beauty itself seem insufficient as a word, and he knew it. That was always the problem. He knew it. Alongside him, created in the same breath, in the same moment, from the same original light, was Elizabeth. Not more powerful than him, not more magnificent, not brighter or louder or more commanding, but different. Different in a way that the morning star could never fully understand, no matter how long he studied her. And he did study her, more than he studied anything else, more than he studied his own reflection, more than he studied the galaxies being born beneath him. Because Elizabeth was the one thing in all of creation that he could not entirely see. She was warm where he was brilliant. She was still where he was luminous. She was deep where he was dazzling. And she loved him. Not the way the lesser beings loved him, with fear beneath the devotion. Not the way the world would eventually love him, with distance and confusion. She loved him the way only a being made from the same original light can love another, completely, without reservation, without condition, without the protection of keeping any part of herself back. She gave him everything she was, every moment, every thought, every breath of her eternal existence. And the morning star received all of it and turned back to his own reflection. This is the part of the story that breaks something in you if you let it. Because Elizabeth was not naive. She was not foolish. She was not the kind of being who could not see what was happening. She saw it perfectly. She watched him choose himself every single time. She watched him look through her to find his own image beyond her. She watched the most magnificent being in existence, the one she had given everything to, love the sound of his own name more than he would ever love the sound of hers. And she stayed. Because that is what love does when it is the real kind. The kind that is not about what you receive. The kind that is about what you are willing to become. There came a day, and in the language of eternal beings, a day is not measured in hours. There came a moment when Elizabeth understood something. She understood that the morning star would never change. Not because he could not, but because he had never been given a reason compelling enough. Because everything had always come to him. Power, devotion, light, admiration, love. All of it flowing toward him without effort, without cost, without him ever having to reach for anything. And Elizabeth understood, in the deep, quiet place where her truest knowing lived, that the only thing that could ever reach him was loss. The only teacher powerful enough to teach the morning star something was absence. So she made a decision so extraordinary that nothing like it had ever been made in all of creation. She decided to disappear, not to leave, not to go somewhere else, not to find another existence, to transform, to take everything she was, every thought, every memory, every century of love she had carried, and compress it into a single object, an instrument. She did not choose just any form. She chose the form that could hold the most truth, the form that could carry the most feeling, the form that, when finally heard, could reach places that words never could. She became a trumpet, not an ordinary trumpet, not a trumpet that any musician could pick up and play. Something else entirely. A trumpet made of a metal that does not exist in any element known to the world. A metal forged from compressed starlight and eternity and the specific weight of love that has never been returned. A metal so dense that simply holding it required something most beings, human or otherwise, had never possessed. Not strength, not power, something rarer, something quieter. The willingness to carry something heavier than yourself. And the spell she wove into her transformation was simple. Simple the way all the most devastating things are simple. The trumpet could only be played by one breath. Not the strongest breath in existence, not the loudest, not the most powerful, the most genuine. The breath of someone who loved something outside themselves more than they loved the sound of their own name. A breath that required the lungs not of an army, not of a god, not of the most powerful being in creation, but the lungs of someone who had learned what the morning star had never learned: surrender. And if that breath ever came, if that one genuine note ever rose from the bell of that trumpet, Elizabeth would return. The morning star found the trumpet the morning she disappeared. He stood before it for a long time, an eternity by the counting of lesser beings. And he felt something he had never felt before, something that had no name in the language of magnificent things, something small and uncomfortable and impossible to dismiss. He missed her. Not the way you miss a possession, not the way you miss something that served you. The way you miss a part of yourself you did not know was there until it was gone. He lifted the trumpet. And what happened in that moment has never been spoken of, because there was no one there to witness it. But the trees that grew in that place for 10,000 years afterward always grew bent slightly inward, as if something invisible had pressed against them from every direction at once. He blew, with everything he had, with the lungs of 1,000 blue whales, with the force of 1,000 suns, with the breath of the most powerful being in all of creation, pressing against that trumpet with everything it possessed. And the trumpet said nothing. Silence, complete, total, unmovable silence. Because Elizabeth had known him perfectly, and she had known that even his missing her would still be about him. Even his grief would still be a form of looking in the mirror. Even his need for her would ultimately be about what he was losing, not about who she was. The trumpet felt the difference, and it stayed silent. He tried again and again for what the world would later measure as centuries. He pressed that trumpet to his lips and gave it everything: force, will, power, desperation. And the trumpet received all of it and returned nothing but silence, until eventually he set it down and walked away and became the thing that history would remember him as. something magnificent that had broken, something powerful that had chosen the wrong direction, something that would spend eternity being almost what it was supposed to be. And the trumpet passed into the world. It moved through centuries, the way rare things move, quietly, from hand to hand, never staying anywhere long enough to be fully understood. Kings found it and believed it was a symbol of their power. They carried it into battle with them, raised it above their heads as a declaration of their right to rule. But no king could make it sing. Warriors claimed it as a trophy, believed that the silence inside it was a kind of weapon they had not yet learned to use. But no warrior could make it sing. Musicians devoted years of their lives to it, studied its construction, analyzed the impossible metal of its body, pressed their most expert breath into its bell with the full mastery of a lifetime of practice. But no musician could make it sing, because technique was not what it required, because power was not what it required, because expertise and strength and will and force were not what it required. It required something that had become rare in the world, something that empires and centuries of history had slowly made more and more difficult to find. A breath from someone who was not trying to be heard. A breath from someone who was not trying to prove anything. A breath from someone who was not thinking about what the sound would make people think of them. Just a breath. From a person who loved something outside themselves, completely, the way Elizabeth had loved. The trumpet passed through centuries, through civilizations that rose and fell and rose again with different names, through wars and peace and the long, quiet spaces between them. It sat in palace vaults. It spent decades in the bottom of ships crossing oceans. It was buried with kings who believed their power would follow them wherever they were going. It was dug up centuries later by people who did not know what they had found. And always, always, the silence. 2,000 years of silence. Elizabeth, compressed into that impossible metal. Every thought she ever had about him, preserved in the weight of it. Every word she never got to say, waiting in the bell of it. Every note she would have sung, if she had been heard, held still, patient, waiting. Not for the most powerful, not for the most famous, not for the most magnificent, for the most genuine. And now we come to tonight, and now we come to you. Because here is what I need you to understand about this moment. Most people never find this story. Most people scroll past the things that were made for them. They get close sometimes. They feel something pull at the edge of their attention. Something that says, wait, stop, this one. And then the next thing arrives, and the pull is gone, and they never know what they almost found. But you stopped, and I do not think that is an accident. Somewhere tonight, in a room that looks exactly like yours, a person sits with this trumpet in their hands. They are not a king. They are not a warrior. They are not a musician of extraordinary skill. They are someone who has been carrying something heavy for a long time. Something they never talked about. Something they learned to fold up small and keep somewhere behind their eyes. They have loved something the way Elizabeth loved, completely, without guarantee of return, without the protection of holding something back. And they picked up the trumpet, not because they believed they could play it, but because they recognized something in the weight of it. The specific weight of something that has been waiting a very long time to finally be heard. They lifted it to their lips, and they did not think about power. They did not think about strength. They did not think about what it would sound like, or what anyone would think. They just breathed, the way you breathe when you have finally stopped pretending. The way you breathe when something true is moving through you, instead of being held back by you. And the trumpet recognized it immediately, because it had been waiting for exactly that frequency, for exactly that quality of breath, for exactly the person who would pick it up, not to be heard, but to finally hear. Close your eyes. What you are about to hear is not a performance. It is not a demonstration of skill. It is not music in the way you have heard music before. What you are about to hear is 2,000 years of silence finally released. Every word Elizabeth never got to say. Every moment she stayed when she could have left. Every time she loved without return. Every note she held inside that impossible metal through every century of waiting, all of it, released tonight. Because of a breath that finally came from the right place. Listen, the narration ends here. Complete silence for 3 full seconds. Then the trumpet enters alone. The trumpet begins with grief. One long note held until it trembles. The sound of something that has been compressed for 2,000 years, finally having space to exist. Slow, aching. Each phrase a sentence that was never spoken. Each rest a breath that was held too long. This is Elizabeth remembering. Elizabeth releasing. Elizabeth saying everything she could never say in the language of sound instead of words. Then something begins to shift. Slowly. The way light shifts before dawn when the sky does not know yet whether to stay dark or become something else. The notes start to find space between the grief, not replacing it, not covering it, growing alongside it. The way green things grow in broken places. The trumpet begins to speak differently, not with mourning, with memory, with the specific joy of someone who loved truly even when it was not returned. Because that kind of love, the real kind, is never wasted. It becomes something. It becomes the music. It becomes the sound that no king could produce, and no warrior could force, and no musician could manufacture, because it can only come from the one place it was always waiting to come from. A person who gave everything, and lost everything, and kept giving anyway. The trumpet understands this now. Elizabeth understands this now. And the sound that comes out is not grief anymore. The full orchestra enters underneath, strings first, then the low rumble of the bass. Then the choir, not singing words, just being present, just holding the space around her. And the trumpet rises, not away from the grief, but through it, higher, freer. The notes becoming something that has no name in the language of ordinary experience. This is what 2,000 years of love looks like when it is finally allowed to exist out loud. This is what Elizabeth sounds like when she is no longer waiting, when she is no longer silent, when the one genuine breath she spent an eternity waiting for finally found her. And she is not mourning. She is not broken. She is not diminished by any of it. She is free. The trumpet holds one final note. The orchestra falls away beneath it, one by one, until it is just the trumpet again, just Elizabeth, alone the way she started, but different now. The note is not lonely. It is complete. It holds everything, the grief, and the joy, and the waiting, and the release. All of it, in one sustained sound that fills every corner of whatever room you're sitting in right now. Then it fades, not abruptly. The way light fades at the end of the day, slowly, leaving something warm in the air behind it, until there is silence again. But it is a different silence than before. Not empty, full. The silence of something that has finally been said. We are Orchestra Wars, and tonight, the trumpet finally spoke. The love story nobody was supposed to know. Now you know. Subscribe. Because every instrument has a story that has never been told. And we are just getting started.